Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're going to be learning today Mir Hashem Daf Tez Zayin Amid Aleph. We're holding in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Hey, and we're discussing the halachos of ksiva, of writing on Chol HaMoed. So we begin today on Daf Tez Zayin Amid Aleph on the top line of the Shulchan Aruch with Sif Beis. Just to remind ourselves what we had said until now. In Sif Aleph, we said that you are not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. Let's remember that writing, ksiva, is a malacha gemura. It's a malacha, it's one of the lamites malachas that would be asr on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, and it's asr to be done on Chol HaMoed as well, with certain exceptions. Now, we said in Sif Aleph, you're not allowed to write on Chol HaMoed, and the Mechaber pointed out, you're not even allowed to be magia, you're not allowed to correct even one letter in a Sefer Torah. And we explained, and we learned in the Mishnah Berurah, that we're discussing a case where the Tzibbur has another Sefer Torah to lein from. And therefore, this is not considered tzarchei Moed. There's no need for Yom Tov. There's no pressing need right now to correct this Sefer Torah and to be able to use this Sefer Torah. You have another Sefer Torah. Take out another Sefer Torah and use that Sefer Torah. And we said, even though this is a case of tzarchei rabim, even though this is something which is required for the Tzibbur, is for public use, and we learned in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Daled that very often tzarchei rabim are mutter even to do a ma'aseh uman. However, in this case, where it's not tzarech hamoed, there's no real need for the moed to do this. Even though it's tzarchei rabim, you would not be allowed to do a ma'aseh uman and write safras in the Sefer Torah. That was in Sif Aleph. Now let's take a look at Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, nearly it appears to me, Shem ein lahem Sefer Torah kosher likrois by b'tzibur. Let's say that Tzibbur does not have another Sefer Torah to lein from. This shul only has one kosher Sefer Torah. So if you don't have another Sefer Torah to lein from, then says the Mechaber, muter lahagioi b'chol HaMoed, you're allowed to correct this Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed, kedei likrois by b'tzibur, so that you should be able to lein from it for the Tzibbur. So here the Mechaber says, if the Tzibbur doesn't have another Sefer Torah, then you could correct the Sefer Torah, which is definitely a ma'aseh uman. You're doing a ma'aseh uman of safras and correcting the Sefer Torah. Nevertheless, you're allowed to do this if the Tzibbur needs the Sefer Torah. Why? Because now it's a tzarech hamoed, you need it to lein on Yom Tov, and it's tzarchei rabim, you need it for the rabim. So when you have the combination of tzarech hamoed and tzarchei rabim, you're even allowed to perform a ma'aseh uman on Chol HaMoed. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here in Ois Cotton Vav, likrois by Tzibbur, if the Tzibbur needs this Sefer Torah to lein from, explains the Chavetz Chaim, why is this mutter? To tzarech hamoed hu, because this is a tzarech hamoed. Va'afilu ma'aseh uman shari, and therefore even a ma'aseh uman is permissible. U'kemay shenizbar b'siman taf kuf mem dalet sif beis. And now I want to point out to you, where does the Mishnah Berurah send us? He sends us to Siman Taf Kuf Mem Dalet Sif Beis, which is on Tezvav Amid Beis, where we learn the halacha that tzarchei rabim are mutter to do even a ma'aseh uman if it's tzarech hamoed. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah tells me here. Why is this mutter? I want to be very careful because I want to show you this is a raya to what I said on Thursday. This Mishnah Berurah says over here, why is it mutter to do the ma'aseh uman of correcting the Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed? Says the Chavetz Chaim, the tzarech hamoed hu, because it's a tzarech hamoed. Now let's remember, just because something is a tzarech hamoed, that's not matir doing a ma'aseh uman. For an individual, for a yachid, something that's a tzarech hamoed is only matir a ma'aseh hedyot, only the act of an amateur, not the act of a craftsman. So what does he mean over here when he says that this fixing the Sefer Torah, which is a ma'aseh uman, is mutter because it's a tzarech hamoed? What he means is, because not only is it a tzarech hamoed, we're talking here about a tzarchei rabim. We're talking about a case where this is a Sefer Torah that belongs to the Tzibbur, and the Tzibbur needs it for leining. So it's tzarchei rabim, and it's tzarchei moed. That's why you're allowed to do a ma'aseh uman. And that's why on Thursday, in Sif Aleph of this Siman, I told you that when the Mechaber said that you're not allowed to correct the Sefer Torah if the Tzibbur does not need it for leining, is to have another Sefer Torah, the reason is because it's not a tzarech hamoed. It is tzarchei rabim, because it's the rabbim's Sefer Torah. So it is tzarchei rabim, but it's not tzarech HaMoed. And you don't have the combination of tzarech HaMoed and tzarchei rabim. That's why in Sif Aleph you weren't allowed to do a Maisa Uman, but here in Sif Beis you have the combination of both tzarech HaMoed and tzarchei rabim, and that's why here in Sif Beis you are allowed to do even a Maisa Uman. Ois Katan Zayin, Mutter Lahagiyoi. In this case, you're allowed to correct the Sefer Torah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, for who hadin, the same halacha would apply im chasar eza ois, if the Sefer Torah is missing a letter, a word, oy teva, or a letter, mutter lichtov, I'm sorry, it's backwards. For who hadin im chasar eza ois, if the Sefer Torah is missing a letter, oy teva, or a word, mutter lichtov, you are allowed to write it. That's a Maisa Uman. It also would be Makab Patish, I guess, because you're completing a Sefer Torah and making a kosher Sefer Torah. But in either case, it's mutter because it's Tzarech HaMoed and it's Tzarchei Rabim. Okay. Now, there is a kasha that may be bothering some of you based on what we learned previously. So if you're thinking about it, Ashrecha v'tov lach, you're fortunate, you picked up on it. If you're not thinking about it, I'm going to address it soon, but I want to finish this sif first. Continues the Shulchan Aruch on the second line, right by the Ois Ches for the Mishnah Berurah. Continues the Mechaber and he says, V'chein, similarly, b'sifrei mikra u'gemara. If you have chamoshim or you have a gemara, shetzarech likrois b'moed, that you need to learn from on Chol HaMoed, muter lahagiam b'moed. You're allowed to be magia, a sefer, not sifrei stam. Not talking about Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzos. We're talking about a Gemara. You have a Gemara or a Chumash, and there's a need to make a correction in it. There's a typo. You're allowed to be magi'et on the Moed. You're allowed to make that correction. Why, says the Mechaber? Mishum dehevi davar ha'ovid. Because the Mechaber says this is a case of a davar ha'ovid. Okay, let's take a look in the Mishnah Berurah over here. Ois Katan Ches. V'chein b'sifrei mikra. So too by a sefer like a chumash. Says the Chavetz Chaim tamua. The Chavetz Chaim says that this is a wonder to him, this halacha. Why is it mutter to me magia a chumash or a gemara on Chol HaMoed? Hayachal lilmoid behem afilu eina mugayim. You could learn from the sefer even if you don't correct the typo. Rak yaser roishim b'makam atos. Make a little mark, make a dot or make a line where the mistake is. V'achar hamoed yisaknem. And that will serve as a reminder, and after Chol HaMoed, after Yom Tov, you'll take out the Chumash and you'll make the correction. You'll take out the Gemara and you'll make the correction. Making a dot in the Sefer is certainly not a Maisa Uman, even according to the Shittas that we learned about earlier, in the previous year, where we said there are Shittas that say that ordinary writing is a Maisa Uman, but making a dot is not a Maisa Uman. So why are you being matir over here a Maisa Uman on Yom Tov, or even if according to the Shittas that it's a Maisa Hedyot, why are you going and being matir the malacha of ksiva, of writing a letter, writing a word? Just make a reishim, just make a dot. So the Chavetz Chaim is puzzled, he's bewildered. Why is this mutter? He says, V'tzarech laimar, what you have to say is, the Mairi, the Mechaber is talking about a case, Shamagia mitoich haseichel, v'loi mitoich sefer acher. Now, I just want to point out, the reason the Mechaber was matir doing this is because he said it's a davar ha'ovid. But the Chavetz Chaim is asking, why is it a davar ha'ovid? Why is it now? Davar ha'ovid is matir, allows even an individual to do even a Maisa Uman, right? So the Mechaber said you could correct the Chumash, you could correct the Gemara, even according to the Shittas that ordinary writing is a Maisa Uman. You're allowed to do this because it's considered a davar ha'ovid if you don't correct the Sefer. Frek the Chavetz Chaim, why is it a davar ha'ovid? Just make a tiny little mark, and then after Yom Tov, you'll go ahead and you'll correct it. Now the Mishnah Berurah is forwarding a possible answer. He says, V'tzarech laimar, you have to say, Demairi, that we're discussing a case, Shamagia mitoich haseichel. The correction that you're making, you're not comparing your Chumash to another Chumash, seeing that there's a mistake in correcting it, or comparing your Gemara to a different print and going ahead and making a correction. If that was the case, then it wouldn't be a davar ovid. Just make a mark that will remind you to make the correction after Yom Tov, and after Yom Tov, take out the other chumash or the other Gemara. You'll see the correction that you have to make, and you'll make the correction. Says the Chavetz Chaim, that's not the case. The case is where you're making a correction based on seichel. You learned a Tzitzis, and you realized that there must be a typo in this Tzitzis. The word that it says over here has to be wrong. And you sweated over this for an hour, and you did your iyun, and you did your research, and you came to the conclusion that there's a hagah that you have to make over here. In that case, says the Chavetz Chaim, ve'afsher, it's possible, she'achar Yom Tov yishkach iyun hazeh. If you wait until after Yom Tov, you're going to forget all of the research that you did, and you may even forget the conclusion that you came to. So now it's a davar ovid. If I don't correct the sefer now on Chol HaMoed, my whole line of reasoning for the correction and the conclusion that I reached might be forgotten, and I may never be able to make the proper correction. That's why it's considered a davar ovid. The heavy davar ovid, says the Chavetz Chaim. Well, Magen Avram Tiritz, the Magen Avram suggests another answer. He says, the Mairi, we're talking about a case, she'ena yochal lilmoid mitoichai, you can't learn from the sefer the way it is on Chol HaMoed, al yedei harbe te'uyosav, because it's full of mistakes. Emena magia mitchila, unless you correct it first. So what I'm imagining over there is, let's say you have a chumash or you have a gemara that you're trying to use it and it's got 20 mistakes. So you're not going to be able to sit down and learn the sugya. There's 20 mistakes over here. The only way you're going to be able to sit down and learn this sugya out of the Gemara is if first you take it, you compare it to a Gemara that's correct, you make the 20 corrections, then you could sit down and then you could learn. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to learn. And the fact that you're not going to be able to learn out of the Sefer, that is definitely considered a davar ovid. The fact that you won't be able to learn is a davar ovid, and therefore you could make your corrections, and then you could sit down and you could learn, and you could make these corrections even if it's considered a maaseh uman, because davar ovid is mater even a maaseh uman. Okay, let's go weiter in the Shulchan Aruch. 3 lines down in the middle of the line, says the Mechaber, Ve'emein lahem Sefer Torah klal. Let's say that Tzibbur doesn't have a Sefer Torah at all. There's no way to lein. You don't have a Sefer Torah. Im efsher, this is wild. Im efsher lekasvai kuloi b'chol HaMoed. If you had the ability to write an entire Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed, al yidei seifrim harbe, by employing a whole bunch of seifrim. You'll get a whole bunch of seifrim together, and each sefer is going to write a urea or 2 ureas or whatever it is, and you're going to write an entire Sefer Torah on Chol HaMoed. Says the Mechaber, Yichtavuhu, you should write the Sefer Torah. The Tzarech HaMoed hu likreis b'Torah b'Tzibbur b'Moed, because this is definitely a Tzarech HaMoed. To be able to lein on Yom Tov is definitely a Tzarech HaMoed, and it's a Tzarech Rabim. And you see again, the fact that it's Tzarech Rabim goes unmentioned. The Mechaber doesn't see the need to mention that this is Tzarech Rabim, because obviously it's Tzarech Rabim. We're talking about leining for the Tzibbur. So all he's addressing is the fact that it's Tzarech HaMoed. Once it's Tzarech HaMoed, you have the combination of Tzarech HaMoed and Tzarech Rabim, and a maaseh uman is mutter. So if you could write an entire Sefer Torah al yedei from Harbe, yichtavu, the Tzarech HaMoed hu likreis b'Torah b'Tzibbur b'Moed, because it's a Tzarech HaMoed and it's Tzarech Rabim to lein for the Tzibbur on Yom Tov. Says, is there Mishnah Berurah here? No. Okay. Says the Ramah. Hagah, says the Ramah, for hu adin, and likewise the same halacha applies, shar svarim lilmoid bahem. You're allowed to write other svarim in order to learn from them on the Moed. Says the Chavetz Chaim, tesh shar svarim lilmoid bahem ritzayin loymar. What the Ramah wants to say is, shet tzarech lilmoid bahem b'Moed. If you have other svarim that you need to learn from on Chol HaMoed, or on Yom Tov, motor laha'atikam k'tei lilmoid behem. You could correct them in order to be able to learn from them. V'ayin bebeis Yosef damash b'sham davkim hu tzarech rabim. That this is only true if it's also a tzarech rabim. If you want to be able to say a daf yomi share to the rabim, and you have to correct the Gemara, or you want to say a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share, and you have to make corrections in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, so then it's a Tzarech HaRabim. Since it's Tzarech HaRabim, it's Tzarech HaMoed and Tzarech Rabim, you're allowed to do even a maaseh uman. From the Magen Avram and the Gra, it's implied that this is mutter even for a yachid, which makes sense because the reason we're being matter, we could be matter this also based on the fact that it's a davar avid. If you don't have the sefer to learn from, you're not going to be able to learn. So that's a davar avid. Davar avid is mutter even with a maaseh uman. Okay, now I mentioned earlier in the sif that there is a kasha that may be bothering people based on something that we learned earlier. And that is, we learned earlier in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Dalid, we learned, take a look in Sif Aleph. So on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph, Siman Taf Kuf Mem Dalid, Sif Aleph. What did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said, I'm going to read this quickly. Tzarchei rabim mutar la'asoisan b'Chol HaMoed. You're allowed to perform malacha for the needs of the public on Chol HaMoed. Kegoin, for example, l'sakin hadrachim, to fix the roads, u'lahasa behem hamichsholos, to remove obstacles from the road so people shouldn't get hurt, or l'tzayin hakvaros, to mark graves, kedei she'izaru mehem hakehanim, so that kehanim should be careful and not become tamei, or l'sakin hamikvos, and to repair mikvos. Says the Ramah Hagah, V'dafka tzarchei rabim ka'elu. It's only these types of tzarchei rabim where you're allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed even if it's a maaseh uman. Shehein tzrichem leguf ha'adam. Because these are things that are also tzarchei haguf. They're physical needs of the body. And the Mishnah Berurah said over here in Ois Katan tzarchei rabim ka'elu, v'hu adin l'sakin merchotz l'tzarech rabim, or to fix a public bathhouse. And if you look in the Sharet Tzion Ois Katan, he brings this down from the Rashba. And when we learnt this in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Dalet, I told you that in order, it comes out that according to this Rashba, which the Ramah seems to be going with, the only time we're matir a maaseh uman for tzarchei rabim is when it's also tzarchei haguf, like a beis hamerchatz, or fixing the roads so people shouldn't get hurt. Those are tzarchei haguf. Now, that begs the question of what we just learned over here in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Hey and Sif Beis, where we're saying that you could do a maaseh uman of writing safras to correct a Sefer Torah when you need it for leining on Yom Tov. Why? Because it's tzarchei HaMoed, it's tzarchei rabim, but it's not tzarchei haguf. So the truth is that if you take a look in the Biur Halacha in Dibra Maskil the Tzarech HaMoed Hu, the Biur Halacha says, Ayin beBiur Hagra Siman Taf Kuf Mem Dalid. Take a look at the Biur Hagra back in Taf Kuf Mem Dalid. Shekasav, where he writes, the Lefi Divrei HaRashba Shuhu V'Sham B'Hagra, according to the Rashba that's brought down by the Meiri, Nidcha Ze Hadin. This din would not be true according to the Rashba. Because according to the Rashba, you also need this to be tzarchei haguf in order to be mater a maaseh uman. The Prima Godim has the same question as the Biur Hagra. How we matter correcting the Sefer Torah with the maaseh uman if it's not a tzarchei haguf? And he gives a little bit of a possible answer. I think the answer that the Prima Godim gives, if memory serves, is the Prima Godim says that the requirement to lein on Yom Tov has an edge over other things that are only tzarchei moed, but they're not tzarchei haguf, because this is a very powerful tzarchei hamoed. If you remember, we always talk about tzarchei hamoed. What's called tzarchei moed? Literally speaking, tzarchei hamoed means it's a need of the moed. It's a need of Yom Tov. It's a need of the festival. But that's not really true. There are things that are considered tzarchei moed, even though it's not a tzarech for the Yom Tov. Tzarchei moed might mean it's something that I need today. It's something that I need now on Yom Tov. So that's called tzarchei hamoed. For example, a perfect example would be in Siman Taf Kuf Mem Daled, l'sakin hadrachim. I need to fix the road. Why is fixing the road considered tzarchei hamoed? It's tzarchei hamoed because people are walking now on Yom Tov. But they're not walking because of Yom Tov. Not everybody is going to shul. They're not walking necessarily because of Yom Tov. They happen to be, they walked in the street yesterday and they walk in the street today. But if it's today, and it needs to be done today, so that's tzarchei HaMoed. So tzarchei HaMoed doesn't necessarily mean it's a tzarech that has to do with Yom Tov. But over here, says the Pri Megadim, the need to lein on Yom Tov is an extra powerful tzarchei HaMoed, because it really is a tzarchei HaMoed. It's a need that is brought about by Yom Tov. Yom Tov requires the leining. And therefore, even though it's not tzarchei HaGuf, says the Pri Megadim, since it's such a strong tzarech HaMoed, and it's also tzarchei Rabim, we're mater emaisa uman. That's what the Pri Megadim seems to say. Now the Bir Halacha continues here, and he says, "V'nira li oid loymar." The Chavetz Chaim says it seems to him also to say, "The gam lahagra yiyah muter sifrei mikra u'gemara lahagiam k'dei lilmod behem." Even the Gra would agree in the case where you want to correct a Gemara or you want to correct a Chumash. Even the Gra would agree that over there you're allowed to do a Ma'aseh Yuman, even though it's not tzarchei HaGuf. Why? To have a davar aved, because that's already a davar aved. Remember, davar aved is matir even a Ma'aseh Uman. So you have the Gra is asking on correcting the Sefer Torah. Why are you allowed to correct the Sefer Torah? It's true it's tzarchei Moed, it's true it's tzarchei Rabim, but it's not tzarchei HaGuf. And according to the Rashba, you need tzarchei HaGuf. And says the Bir Agra, says the Chavetz Chaim here in the Bir Halacha, even the Gra would agree that to correct a Chumash or to correct a Gemara, even if that's considered a Ma'aseh Yuman, that would be mutter. Why? Because we're using a different heter. We're not going to use the heter of tzarchei Rabim. We're going to use the heter of davar ovid. If I can't learn the daf today, that's a davar ovid. For davar ovid, I'm even allowed to do a Ma'aseh Yuman. Now the truth is that answer of the Bir Halacha also begs a question. If you're telling me that it's considered a davar ovid if I can't learn the daf today, so why isn't it a davar ovid if I can't lein? Leining is a mitzvah, hearing leining is a mitzvah, learning Torah is a mitzvah. So how come this, if I can't learn the daf, that's a davar ovid? So it's also a davar ovid if I can't hear leining. So I was thinking, it could be that an answer to that would be, if the Tzibbur doesn't have a Sefer Torah, then there is no obligation of Kriyas HaTorah. If I don't have a Sefer Torah, I'm not obligated to learn. If I'm an onus, I have no way to fulfill the obligation. I'm not obligated to learn. We don't say that if you don't have a Gemara, you don't have a chiyuv of Talmud Torah. You always have a chiyuv of Talmud Torah. The chiyuv of Talmud Torah is on you all the time. You always have a chiyuv of Talmud Torah. So if I can't fulfill my chiyuv of Talmud Torah right now, that's a davar ovid. If I can't fulfill my chiyuv of Kriyas HaTorah because I don't have a Sefer Torah, maybe that's not considered a davar ovid. Okay. Now let's go to Sif Gimel in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Kaisev Adam Tefillin u'Mezuzos la'atzmai. Somebody is allowed to write Tefillin. You could write the Parshias of Tefillin, definitely a Ma'aseh Uman. You could write the Parshias of Tefillin, or you could write a Mezuzah la'atzmai, for your own use, not for somebody else. You could write it for your own use. V'toive al yerechai tchelis, and you could spin tchelis on your lap, v'tzitzis, for tzitzis, lebigdoi, in order to have tzitzis for your garment. You're allowed to do this. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah says a nice cut and yud. La'atzmai, you're allowed to write tefillin, you're allowed to write a mezuzah for your own personal use. Says the Mishnah Berurah, afilu lahanichan achar hamoed. This is mutter, even if you're not going to use these tefillin, or you're not going to use this mezuzah, or you're not going to use these tzitzis on the Moed. You're not using them until after Yom Tov. So there's bechlal no tzarchei hamoed over here at all. Now, let's remember, one of the reasons that the Mishnah Berurah says over here that this is true, afilu lahanichan achar hamoed, if you take a look at the Sharet Tzion Ois Katan Yud, what does it say? What does the Chavetz Chaim say? Keinu lahapaiskim disviralahu de'ein lahaniach tefillin b'chol HaMoed. Let's remember, we have this machlokes, do you wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed or not? And this goes back to the Rishonim, the Mechaber Paskins, that you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Now, where does this halacha come from, that you're allowed to write tefillin on Chol HaMoed? It comes from a Mishnah. It's a mimer of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kaisav Adam la'atzmai tefillin. You're allowed to write tefillin for your own personal use on Chol HaMoed. Now, even the Rishonim who hold that you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, they still have that Mishnah. So when the Mishnah says that you're allowed to write tefillin on Chol HaMoed, per force, the Mishnah has to mean that it's not for use on Chol HaMoed, because you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. So then Rabbi Yehuda is telling you in the Mishnah you're allowed to write tefillin on Chol HaMoed even for after the Moed. Very interesting, even though it's not Tzarchei HaMoed. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah says over here, when the Mechaber says that you're allowed to write tefillin on Chol HaMoed, he means afilu lahanicha nachar HaMoed, even though you're not going to wear them on Chol HaMoed and you're only going to wear them after Yom Tov. De'ilu lahanicha b'sayich HaMoed, because if we were talking about a case where you're going to wear them on Yom Tov, so there's an actual tzarech HaMoed, in the locales where the minig is to wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, but again, the Mechaber can't be talking about that, because the Mechaber holds you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Then it would be mutter to write the tefillin even if it's somebody else who needs tefillin on Chol HaMoed, like the Ramah is going to tell us. Ois Kat Yud Aleph, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber said you're allowed to spin tchelis. You're allowed to make tchelis thread, tchelis strings on Chol HaMoed for your tzitzis al yerechai. And the lashon of the Mechaber was you could do this on your thigh, on your lap. Lav dafka, the Chavetz Chaim says it doesn't mean that when we say that you're going to spin it on your lap, the implication is that you're spinning with your fingers. You're spinning by hand in your lap. Says the Mishnah Berurah Lav dafka, that's not specific. Ta'afilu bepelech shari. You're even allowed to use a pelech. A pelech is a handheld spinning. It's called a hand spindle. It's a long stick with a wheel on one end, and then on the other side of the wheel there's a little stick that you twirl with your thumb and forefinger. So the threads are attached to the wheel. I don't have anything here that I could give you a better picture of. But again, it's a stick, and then on one end of the stick there's a wheel, and then behind the wheel there's a piece that you could spin. The threads, I believe, come off the wheel, and as you spin, it spins everything together. So a little hand spindle you're allowed to use. When the Mechaber used this lashon, that you're allowed to spin it in your lap, he was coming to contrast that what are you not allowed to do? Ela begalgal. You're not allowed to use the machine, a spinning wheel. You're not allowed to use the avshemilsa tuva. When you're already setting yourself up with a machine, when you're setting yourself up with a spinning wheel, now already it's avshemilsa. Now it's something that's publicized, and that we don't want. It's Chol HaMoed. We don't want to be mezalzel in the Moed, but to use a little hand spindle, that you're allowed to do. Ice cutting your bays, you're allowed to do this for tzitzis lebigdoi, for your garment, and true to form, just like the Chavetz Chaim said, that when the Mechaber says you're allowed to write tefillin, and you're allowed to write a mezuzah, it means even for use after Yom Tov, so too by the tzitzis, says the Mishnah Berurah here in Ice cutting your bays, afilu lahanichad bebigdoi lelav shayach haramoyed, v'chanal. You're allowed to do this even if you're going to take the tzitzis and attach the tzitzis to a beged only after Yom Tov. So what did we see here? What's the halacha that we see here so far in Siv Gimel? What we see is, even though writing is also on Chol HaMoed, and even though writing is a Maaseh Uman, and even though spinning thread is also on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to do these things l'tzarchei mitzvah, to write tefillin, to write a mezuzah, to spin threads and strings for tzitzits, is mutter. That's a malacha gemura. Spinning thread is one of the lamites malachas. It's a malacha gemura. Still in all, you're allowed to do these things for the mitzvah of tefillin, of mezuzah, of tzitzits. And not only are you allowed to do them for the mitzvah, you're allowed to do them even though it's not a tzarech HaMoed. Even though you're not going to use the tefillin on Chol HaMoed or on Yom Tov, you're not going to use the mezuzah, you're not going to put it up on Chol HaMoed or for Yom Tov. All of these things are going to be used first after Yom Tov. You're still allowed to do these things. Why are you allowed to do these things? It seems that the answer is that these things are mutter because they are tzarchei mitzvah. That's why they're mutter. Now, if you're doing your chazara, you're going to ask me a bomb kasha right away from the previous year, not the previous year, from, I guess, Wednesday's year. You'll ask me from Siman Tov Kuf Mem Daled on Tesvav Amud Beis, the Ramah at the end of Sif Aleph. If you take a look at Tesvav Amud Beis, the very top line of Tesvav Amud Beis, let's see what the Ramah said. The Ramah said, V'hu adin de l'shar tzarchei mitzvah, for other tzarchei mitzvah. What had the Ramah mentioned here? The Ramah said on the bottom of Tesvav Amud Aleph, Aval shar tzarchei rabim, k'goin binyan beis hakneses. Let's say building a shul. Aser, you're not allowed to build a shul. Aser lasis b'mayit. V'hu adin, and the same halacha applies, the l'shar tzarchei mitzvah, for other mitzvah needs. Aser lasis meleches uman b'mayit. You're not allowed to do a ma'isa uman for tzarchei mitzvah on Chol HaMoed. So how are you allowed to write tefillin? Writing tefillin is tzarchei mitzvah, it's a ma'isa uman. The Ramah says over here that you're not allowed to do it. And over here, we have the Mechaber, who says over here, you're allowed to write tefillin, you're allowed to write a mezuzah. And you're allowed to do it even if you're not going to use the tefillin and the mezuzah on the Moed. That's definitely a Maaseh Uman, and it's mutter apparently because it's tzarchei mitzvah. And the Ramah does not disagree with it. So don't try to tell me it's a machlekes the Mechaber and the Ramah. It's not a machlekes the Mechaber and the Ramah. And the Ramah can't possibly disagree with this because I told you the source is a Mishnah. So clearly this is mutter. Why is this mutter? So obviously I'm not the first one to ask this kasha. The Rashba, in the Chuvas HaRashba, the Rashba is puzzled by this. The Rashba says, why is this mutter and building the shul is not mutter? So the Rashba says that the difference between building the shul and writing the tefillin is that if you don't write the tefillin, you'll be mevatel a mitzvah daraisa. If you don't write the tefillin, so you don't have tefillin. You don't have tefillin, you're not going to put on tefillin, you'll be mevatel a mitzvah. If you don't build the shul, you're not going to be mevatel the mitzvah. The 10 people can get together somewhere else. You'll find a room somewhere else. If that was true, then you would want to make an argument that maybe, according to this Rashba, you would maybe advance an argument, then why is it mutter to write tefillin and put on somebody else's tefillin? Why is it mutter to write tefillin if I'm not going to need the tefillin until after the Moed? So you'll say, well, even if I don't need the tefillin until after the Moed, so on Yisroel Chag I'm not going to have tefillin because I didn't write the tefillin. But how about if you could borrow somebody else's tefillin? But I did see brought down from the Talmidei HaRashba that even when you don't need the tefillin on the Moed, writing your own tefillin is being oisik b'mitzvah delay. That is your mitzvah. You have a mitzvah chiyuvis. You have an obligatory mitzvah to put on tefillin. And to be mekayim that mitzvah, you need tefillin. So you're writing tefillin in order to be mekayim mitzvah delay. And you need tefillin in order to be mekayim the mitzvah. You're not going to go the rest of your life without tefillin using other people's tefillin. Masha ain't going to build a shul. It's the Tzibbur, it's not your mitzvah. It's much easier for the Tzibbur to be mekayim the mitzvah in another way, find another room. There's also an interesting Pri Megadim here. The Pri Megadim says, okay, so if we're being mater a maaseh uman to write tefillin and to write a mezuzah and to spin thread for Tzitzis, does that mean that there's all sorts of other tzarchei mitzvah that are also mutter a ma'aseh uman on Chol HaMoed? So the Pri Megadim says no. The Pri Megadim says that tefillin, mezuzah, and tzitzits, they are mitzvah rabbah. Those are great mitzvahs. Those are special mitzvahs that are on another level, another darga. And for those mitzvahs, a ma'aseh uman is mutter on Chol HaMoed, but not for other mitzvahs. Now, tefillin, we know, is shkula keneged kol HaTorah kula. It's brought down that tefillin is azach choshev a mitzvah. Tefillin is shkula keneged kol HaTorah kula. Also, tzitzis is brought down. Tzitzis is a tremendous mitzvah. I think that what might be unique about these three mitzvahs, first of all, they're all mitzvahs ala guf. They're all mitzvahs beguf. They're mitzvahs that you're mekayim with your body. You put the tefillin on your body. You put the tzitzis on your body. Even the mezuzah that you don't put on your body, but these are all things that surround you with the mitzvah. Every time you walk through a door, you see the mezuzah. It reminds you, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. They used to wear tefillin all day long. Tzitzis you do wear all day long. So these are a mitzvah rabbah. And there are two things that I want to mention about that. One is, I always have a very, very strong memory, and it was brought to the fore again recently, when I recently saw a video clip of the Rishiva Zatzal, of Rav Moshe Zechet Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vracha. Interestingly enough, you could search for this on YouTube. If you do a search for Rabbi Moshe Feinstein on YouTube, you should find it. There's a little video clip of the Rishiva Zatzal putting on tefillin in his house, B'Soif Yamav. And I remember it. I remember it like yesterday. The Rishiva Zatzal put on tefillin not the way we put on tefillin, or at least the way not the way I put on tefillin. How many of us put on tefillin? You know, it's like mitzvah nashim ulamado. It's over before we even start. And how much thought do we really put into it? Rav Moshe put on tefillin. You know, I could endeavor to show you a little bit better what I mean. I'll just, if I could pull this out, I'll borrow my my belt here for a second. Oh, it's sewn in. But I could show you at least with here. When the Rishiva Zatzal put on tefillin, every wind of the strap was a maisa. It was everything. You could see the conscious effort that went into it. Verastich li le'elam, verastich li b'tzedek u'v'mishpat, u'v'chesed u'v'rachamim, verastich li be'emunah. Every wind was a maisa. Every wind was a chashuv act that was done with intent. When he put the tefillin, he did 7 winds around his arm, and he said the pasuk of Pesach es Yodecha when he did it. So when he did it, he went, Pesach es Yodecha umazbiah chol chai ratzain. Every wind was a conscious act imbued with intent and feeling. It wasn't the mitzvah rabbah that tefillin is, as a choshev a mitzvah that tefillin is. One of my rabbeim, Zechet Tzadik L'Vracha, I was a Torah Semes boy in Borough Park. I went to Yeshiva Torah Semes, and my manal was Rav Elias Schwartz, who I was actually personally quite close to. And when every bacher, when it came to the day that he put on tefillin, Rabbi Schwartz encouraged us and encouraged our parents very strongly that even on that day, sometimes the parents want to make something special and they take the child somewhere else. Rabbi Schwartz said, no, bring him to the yeshiva minyan to put on tefillin. And I realized later it was because Rabbi Schwartz wanted to be part of being mechanech the child and putting on tefillin. And Rabbi Schwartz gave the same bracha to every single bar mitzvah boy on the day that he put on tefillin. And I remember like yesterday how he used to say, may the tefillin go into your heart and your bloodstream. And that's what tefillin do, Rabbi Isai. Now that I said this, I can't resist. I have to tell you a quick story. I have to tell you a Rebbe Shemaisa, but a Rebbe Shemaisa that happened with me personally. I may have told it to you, may have shared this with you before, I'm not sure, but I'll share it with you now in case I didn't. When I became a chassan, I decided that I wanted to have my tefillin checked before my chasana. I think I figured out that it was about 7 years. I wanted to have my tefillin checked. And I went to a sefer. For those of you who are familiar with Borough Park of old, on 14th Avenue, there was a chash of a sefer, Rav Pinter, Zechrein L'Vracha, and he was a friend of the family. He was a friend of my father's, Al Rishalom. So I brought my tefillin to Rabbi Pinter to have them checked. And I gave him the tefillin in the morning, right after davening, and he took the tefillin from me, and he said, no problem, I'll check them, and I'll do whatever needs to be done, and I'll meet you tomorrow morning by davening. We both davened in the Svardish Shul on 14th Avenue. He said, I'll meet you by the 8 o'clock minyan, and I'll give you back your tefillin, you'll have your tefillin for davening. I said, fine, no problem. The next morning I came to the 8 o'clock minyan, and Rabbi Pinter was there, but he was taking off his tefillin. He had davened by the 7:30 minyan, or the 7:15 minyan. and he was taking off his tefillin. And he saw me, and he said, "Good, Baruch Hashem, you're here. I have to apologize. Your tefillin are not ready. I'm having some trouble with your tefillin. So I davened at the 7:20 minyan so that I should be finished davening, and you'll use my tefillin for davening, and I'll give you your tefillin later." So he's a sefer. He gave me his tefillin, and he adjusted the shalroish, everything, and I wore his tefillin for davening. And after davening, I brought him back his tefillin. His store was a block away. I brought him back his tefillin. He took his tefillin, and he told me, "All right, same plan tomorrow morning. We'll meet by the 8 o'clock minyan, and I'll give you your tefillin." I skipped the main part of the story. So I davened that first day wearing Rabbi Pinter's tefillin. At the end of davening, the Rav of the shul, Rav David Singer Zecher Tzadik Levracha, who was also close to my family, came over to me after davening, and he says, "Oh, Shalom Aleichem, how are you? How's the family?" And I couldn't respond to him. What do I mean that I couldn't respond? He asked me, "How's everything?" And I wanted to answer him, but I felt, how could I answer him? How could I talk? I'm wearing tefillin. You're not supposed to talk when you're wearing tefillin. You're not supposed to speak dvarim b'teilim when you're wearing tefillin. At the same time, I felt like, what kind of chutzpah am I? I'm a bacher, and the Rav of the shul is coming, a Talmid Chacham Muflig. He's coming and he wants to speak to me, and I'm not answering. I'm probing frumkeit over here that I can't speak because I'm wearing my tefillin. I said to myself, am I such a frumma that I never spoke wearing tefillin? That suddenly now when the Rav is trying to speak to me, I shouldn't answer him? But yet, I could not bring myself to answer. I just couldn't bring myself to speak. So I nodded with my head, And Rabbi Singer looked at me and said, "Oh, yeah, you're wearing tefillin. Okay. All right." After davening, I brought Rabbi Pinter his tefillin. I gave him his tefillin. He said, "Okay, same plan tomorrow. I'll meet you by the 8 o'clock minyan." Tomorrow, sure enough, I come to the 8 o'clock minyan. And once again, Rabbi Pinter davened at 7:20. He's giving me his tefillin. He's still having trouble with my tefillin. He has to finish them up. I should daven in his tefillin. Again, I davened in his tefillin. And again, after davening, Rabbi Singer came over to me. And this time, not only Rabbi Singer came over to me, but Rabbi Yossel Fishman, Zechrein Levracha, the longtime famous Shamash of the Sefer Shul, who was also a good friend of the family, also came over to me to ask me about the family and how everything is. And again, I couldn't answer. I just couldn't bring myself to speak while I was wearing the tefillin. And it felt like the strangest thing to me. All right, I took off the tefillin. I came to Rabbi Pinter and I gave him his tefillin. And he had just finished my tefillin. So he gave me back my tefillin. And he's apologizing to me. "I'm so sorry that for 2 days you didn't have your tefillin." And now, Rabbi Pinter was a zaken and a chashav yid, and he's apologizing to me. I didn't want him to be apologizing to me. So I told him, I said, "Nishdaf farvas, why are you apologizing to me? It's okay." I said, "Baruch Hashem, I had the opportunity to daven for 2 days wearing such chashav tefillin." So he looked at me funny, and he said, "What do you mean such chashav tefillin? Why are you calling my tefillin such chashav tefillin?" So I looked at him and I said, "Mistama, Rabbi Pinter's tefillin are very chashav tefillin." That's all I meant. What I meant was Rabbi Pinter was a sefer for decades. It must be chashav tefillin. So he looked at me. He says, "You don't know how chashav these tefillin are." So I said, "What do you mean?" So he says, "Let me tell you about these tefillin." He said, many years ago, Klosenberger Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Levracha, came to me that I should do work on his tefillin. So I did work on his tefillin, and when he came to pick up his tefillin, he wanted to pay me. And I told him, "I'm not taking money from the Rebbe." So he told me, he said, "If you don't want to take money from me, take my ritzuas and give me new ritzuas and keep my ritzuas." And the Rebbe smiled and he said, "If you take my ritzuas, you could probably sell them to some chassid for for a hun rav, for a tremendous amount of money, the Rebbe's ritzuas." So Rabbi Pinter looked at him and said, "Rebbe, I'll gladly give you new ritzuas and I'll gladly keep your ritzuas, but I'm not selling them. If you give me your ritzuas, I'm wearing them." So Klosenberger Rebbe looked at him very seriously, and Klosenberger Rebbe said to him, If you sell them to somebody else, then I have no achrayus for them. But if you're going to wear them, knowing that they were my ritzuos, then there's something you need to know. And that is, you need to know that I never spoke a word of Dvarim B'Telim in these ritzuos. The Klosberger Rebbe never spoke Dvarim B'Telim at all. But he says, I never spoke a word other than Torah or Tefillah wearing these ritzuos. And if you're going to wear them, you need to know that. When I heard that from Rabbi Pinter, I was shocked. And I must have turned a little bit white. Because Rabbi Pinter looked at me and said, what's the matter? Is everything okay? I told him, I said, you just answered what happened the last 2 days. And I told him how when Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Fishman, Zechronim Levracha, had come over to me, I could not bring myself to speak. I didn't know I was wearing the Klosberger Rebbe's tefillin. I didn't know that those were tefillin that the Klosberger Rebbe wore, that he said he never spoke a word that wasn't Torah or Tefillah, wearing those tefillin. But yet, I couldn't speak when I was wearing those tefillin. That's what tefillin does, Rabbi say. Like Rabbi Schwartz, Zechronim Levracha, said, the tefillin goes into your mind and into your bloodstream. If you put on tefillin like Rav Moshe did, if you put on tefillin with intent, if you put on tefillin with kavanah, with a recognition that you're doing Ratzon HaBorei, that you're doing what Borei Olam wants you to do, and you're putting on those tefillin kedei l'shabed b'zeh tavei samach shivois libeinu la'avodah, that you're binding yourself to service of the Rebbeinu Shalom, those tefillin go into your mind and into your bloodstream. That's what the tefillin does. This is a mitzvah rabbah. The other thing that I feel the need to say, even though we're going a little bit long, is the mitzvah of tzitzis. The mitzvah of tzitzis is also an unbelievable mitzvah. Now, it's very interesting. People will say, well, the mitzvah of tzitzis is only if you're wearing a beged that is arba kanfos. If you're not wearing a beged that is arba kanfos, you're not mechuyev to wear tzitzis. We, generally speaking, don't wear garments that have 4 corners. So, okay, so I'm not wearing a garment that has 4 corners. I'm not mechuyev in tzitzis. Why do I have to put on a tas katan and be mechayev myself in tzitzis? I'll just leave it off. And the truth be told is, I have seen again and again and again, and it distresses me very much, that the younger generation nowadays treats the mitzvah of tzitzis with unfortunate kalos. They treat it very leniently. And I've heard this argument from people of the younger generation. You see them not wearing tzitzis, and you ask them, where are your tzitzis? Oh, it's hot. Oh, I was playing ball. Oh, I was working, and it's hard to work while I'm wearing tzitzis, and it makes me hot. I don't know. We grew up, if our mothers caught us without wearing tzitzis, they looked at us like we were from the moon. What, you're not wearing tzitzis? What, are you crazy? You have to wear your tzitzis. We didn't walk down Amos without tzitzis. It's like walking without a yarmulke. We don't go around without a yarmulke. You wear a yarmulke and you wear tzitzis. But yet the younger generation nowadays seems to have this kalos towards the mitzvah of tzitzis. And I always say that I think the Yetzer Hara has a special dislike for the mitzvah of tzitzis. Because you know what the mitzvah of tzitzis does? We say, the Chazal tell us, the Chazal speak about Klal Yisrael, and they say that a Yid is a mole, afilu hareikanim shebaim, even the empty ones are malei mitzvahs karimain, are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. How are the empty ones of Klal Yisrael, how are the amaratzim of Klal Yisrael filled with mitzvahs like a rimain? Because one of the reasons is because they wear tzitzits all day. They're mechayev themselves in the mitzvah of tzitzis, even though they're not wearing a garment of 4 corners. They put one on, specially in order to obligate themselves in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And now all day they walk around wearing tzitzis. Every second they're being mechayev a mitzvah. So, afilu hareikanim shebehem, even the empty ones, they're not running around all day doing mitzvahs. They're busy doing whatever they're doing. They're going to work. They're not thinking in the sheish mitzvahs tamidius, and they're not opening up a sefer, and they don't have too much kavanah when they make a bracha by the water cooler, unfortunately. So they're not really going to be mekai mitzvahs all day. But they're wearing tzitzits all day long. So they're mole mitzvahs karimain. The Yetzer Hara can't take that. The Yetzer Hara cannot abide freebies. The Yetzer Hara cannot abide that Yidden are walking around getting freebie mitzvahs all day. So the Yetzer Hara comes along and creates a kalus in the mitzvah of tzitzis, and I think Rabbi said this is something that we have to take care to counter. We have to be on the lookout for this, and we have to counter it. And even if you don't have kids that you could chase after, or you don't have Eideklich to chase after when it comes to this mitzvah, another way to counter it is to be extra special nizar in the mitzvah of tzitzis on your own. Be nizar in the mitzvah of tzitzis and bring into the world a zehirus in the mitzvah of tzitzis. In any case, just to close off what we were saying over here, so we have over here a halacha that on Chol HaMoed you're allowed to do even a ma'aseh uman, to prepare Tefillin, to prepare Mezuzos, to prepare Tzitzis, even if it's for the need for after the Moed. And we'll stop over here for the last few lines at Tezayin Amud Aleph of V'im Ein Loi. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This list of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeicha finally to see the B.S. Goyel Tzedek B'Mehera V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.